on behalf of the NUJ Belfast District Branch, we'd like to welcome you to this event. It's something that arguably we should have perhaps been involved in before, but this is the first time that the branch has actually organised an event as part of this festival. And a few years ago, we decided that we would like to have a flagship event every year and a half or so. And it was also then decided that we would have it in memory of a much missed and much loved colleague, Lyra McKee. And so we had an event in the Crumlin Road Jail. It was to be a lecture, an inaugural lecture. Unfortunately, the person that was to deliver it had to pull out due to a family bereavement. But we carried on with a symposium. And it was also at the time of an NUJ event, a UN event, to highlight the threats to journalists and to highlight journalist freedom. So it was a very successful event. We also talked about that dreadful night in April 2019. Alison Miller showed clips from her excellent documentary, but we were also able to widen it out. Remember other colleagues like Martin O'Hagan, and to extend it also into Europe and the threats to journalism in general. So it was a very important event, and obviously since that, there's been a number of particular conflicts that we know about, and even just this week, of course, in Turkey, we know that we have journalists expelled and we have photojournalists arrested. So it is very much a thing that we will turn to again in the future. But for the next event, we wanted to look at the threats or perhaps any potential opportunities to artificial intelligence in the world of journalism. And so that takes us to this event here as part of the Imagine Belfast Festival. And we are delighted and honoured to have a great panel with us here. This is the first time that I've met the General Secretary of the National Union of Journalists, who's on our panel, Laura Davison. And we're delighted, an old friend of the festival, the Assistant General Secretary, Seamus Dooley, is with us as well. So we're very honoured to have NUJ headquarters with us this evening. We wanted to look at, to get AI from a kind of student journalist perspective, somebody who deals with it every day in their own life and as in studies, but also in the particular field of journalism. So we're delighted that somebody has travelled all the way from West Belfast to be with us tonight, Stefan Bruce. And we know that Westies don't generally come into town very often, so we're very honoured that Stefan has come to give his perspective. So I think that's a very important part of the panel. Another very important part is law, and we've got Jude with us, Jude Copeland, is a legal review manager and associate of Cleaver, Fulton Rankin. Now, Jude actually contacted us, and he wanted to be part of them. So we're really, really honoured that Jude has come and volunteered his services. So that's a very important part of the panel. And he did know Lyra, so it adds a certain poignancy to the panel. On a personal level, it's also the first time that I've got to meet Ciarán O'Connor. I have worked with him before in this festival, looking at the problems of online abuse, but it was an online event. It was during the pandemic, so I've got to finally meet him in person. Ciarán works for the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, which is an excellent organisation if you get a chance to follow it, because they do a lot of important work highlighting the threats posed, for example, online abuse or disinformation. And I particularly followed them in the Irish general election in November to highlight the threats posed by far-right disinformation and interference in the election campaign. So it's a very worthwhile organisation to follow. So we're very delighted to have Ciarán with us all the way from Kerry, almost as far as West Belfast. So thank you very much indeed. And now it's a great pleasure to hand over the chair of tonight's proceedings, who's not only that, but she's also the chair of this branch. And it's the wonderful and very formidable Anne Hales.
That helps to have a microphone. Thanks, Ciarán, very much indeed. Well, good evening and welcome to this second event held in memory of Lyra McKee. Lyra was murdered in Derry on the 18th of April 2019. She was only 29 years of age, a young news hound, eager to find and cover stories both here and abroad. That night, she heard of the unrest in the Cregan, and a natural instinct for looking for a story took her to the fringe of the riot and sadly to the wrong place at the wrong time. She is one of 3 journalists murdered in Ireland: Marty O'Hagan, Veronica Guerin and Lyra. We remember them tonight with love and respect. I'll turn first of all, Kieran, to you. You know, the UK government states that AI can be defined as the use of digital technology to create systems capable of performing tasks commonly thought to require intelligence, whatever that means. Kieran, who creates these systems?
So I suppose right now there's a lot of discourse, a lot of conversations around artificial intelligence, the threats, the promises of it all. And really what that relates to is this kind of boom, particularly the last 2-3 years around generative AI, so ChatGPT, other large language models like that. When we talk about artificial intelligence, we kind of have to go back, well, we have to go back very, very far for the computing concepts that underpin a lot of it. But we've been living with artificial intelligence for years now. If you use Netflix and the kinds of movies or TV shows that it recommends based on your previous behavior, that's the form of artificial intelligence. All of these ways in which systems or technologies are designed to try and suggest pieces of content. If you go on your phone and you open the Google browser on an Android and it has different articles from different news organizations that it thinks you might be interested in, that's also another form of artificial intelligence. The concern with generative AI is that the barriers have lowered entirely for anyone to be able to create, post, promote false, misleading, potentially harmful information, and to do it at scale with very little technical expertise themselves. So then, with artificial intelligence, these are the technological tools and processes that are being designed for all types of normal, everyday consumer products and processes, but also in ways in which we consume and access news and information online, and for how news organizations are using it. I suppose we'll get into it. There is a lot of promise, but also some potential pitfalls, things like over-reliance on AI, the potential replacement of human workers, and also what we call hallucinations, when AI gets things wrong. So how intelligent is it? We find out more and more all the time that it's not that intelligent. Sometimes it gets things wrong. But it does have a lot of promise for assisting in perhaps the more mundane tasks, working through large data sets, finding patterns, trends, these kinds of things. So that's perhaps where the intelligence comes in.
It's not going to be mundane, though, if the President, if Keir Starmer, decides to turn the UK into the hub of AI and have all his civil servants, probably a lot of them out of work, because he's turning it all over to artificial intelligence. Is that not madness?
Well, what's the promise from the kind of optimist side of it is that artificial intelligence will be able to help all forms of workers streamline all types of tasks that are part of the daily work. The concerns for something like civil servants and the role of government in different departments is that you also bring in personal data of the people who use these services for welfare, for different services like this. So in governments like the UK, perhaps trying to pivot towards being what they might call an AI superpower, they want to be seen at the forefront, I think, of this rapid technological change and place and position the UK at the heart of that. And the priority is that in government departments making that shift is that they place ethics and responsible use of these systems at the heart of it as well.
Will they have sympathy with the people that they're working with? Because certainly these machines and this technology doesn't seem to care about people at all.
Well, yeah, that comes back to the government in that case, or other large organizations that are instructing or maybe mandating their staff to use AI or Gen AI systems more and more. And yes, there comes all kinds of risks and concerns with that for the adaptation of workers and how perhaps AI literate they are or are not, but also the inherent flaws that can be common within these systems too. And that's not only related to government, that's also private organisations who their staff are now more and more relying or being forced to use artificial intelligence as well.
Would you say that we're misguided to be frightened of this?
No, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of potential risks, and we've seen even when newspapers get things wrong. Famously, the Irish Times published an opinion piece in May 2023 about, I think it was, the person was writing about fake tan and how it was a form of, I think, cultural appropriation for people, for women to use it. Turned out this was not a real person. This was someone who was testing out, I suppose, the Irish Times internal editorial management, but also they had a Gen AI image of the author, a woman with, I think, blue hair, and they had the same initials as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So there was a number of giveaways in that, but that got through, and that was a very, I suppose, humorous example of when AI can be misused. There's all types of other potential pitfalls that are happening, I'm sure, all the time beneath the surface that we're not even aware of yet.
Laura, you actually had a very serious time, still going on, I presume, with the BBC reporting when it was extremely, I mean, it was just lies being fed from some AI source that Nadal, the tennis player, was gay, that the darts player, Luke, had won his contest long before it even happened. And you took that up. You're now challenging that, aren't you?
Yes, thanks, Anne. Can I just say that it's an honour to be here this evening for my first visit as General Secretary to Northern Ireland, and particularly on such a special occasion, part of remembering Lyra, who I'm sure, I never had the privilege of meeting her, but I'm sure she would have been interested in this topic this evening with the work that she did as a digital journalist, and to have her voice in the discussions that we're having in the NUJ about this subject. I think you're referring to the Apple intelligence issue, which people may have followed earlier this year, whereby the digital tool that Apple was using to summarize news stories was summarizing them falsely and incorrectly. And not only was it doing that, but it was doing that by drawing on material from respected news sources like the BBC and producing it alongside the news brand icon of those organisations. So it appeared to be being created by the BBC in some of these particular examples. And there were other broadcasters that were impacted as well. And complaints and concerns were raised by the broadcasters, by a whole range of organisations, and by the NUJ, because clearly in that situation there's a huge impact in terms of public trust in what is being produced and summarised. You know, people would have looked at those and thought that they were accurate stories, and they were completely wrong. And so it comes back to what you were saying around the dangers of the tool. So we spoke up about that as the NUJ, highlighted it. We did various press pieces on it, as did a range of other organisations. And in fact, Apple pulled the tool and said that they would pause the use of it. I think, you know, they had no other option, frankly. It was reputationally damaging to the organisation and was so clearly wrong on so many instances. So, again, I think that's an example of the dangers that can be inherent in the tool.
How can the union protect journalists, you know, and photographers? I mean, it's a very wide range of people. Because their work is being stolen, their voices are being stolen. Can the union do anything to protect us against that?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a whole range of things that we can do. And I'd be really interested to hear people's contributions this evening as well, because I think it's an ongoing discussion that we're having. We haven't got all the answers by any means, but there's a number of different routes that we can follow. So there is, I think, you know, really importantly, the work that we're doing in our workplaces, in our chapels, to engage with employers about this issue. And that's crucial because it can be a fairly swift process. You've got that really immediate conversation taking place between an employer and the workforce, which is absolutely vital in terms of how this evolves and having the voices of journalists in that conversation. In the US, they've had a lot of success with agreeing wording that can be introduced into union contracts around layoffs, for example, and around transparency in the use of this technology, which is really important as well. And those discussions are taking place in our workplaces. So we have, with some employers, regular meetings, for example, to discuss it. We have an employer where the union has set up a particular subcommittee to discuss these issues with the employer and look at emerging uses and tools within the organisation. So that, I think, is a really important route. There is obviously the legislative aspects that we're pressing for a proper framework for these things to be developed. We recently contributed to the UK government's consultation on copyright and AI, which is a really significant consultation that's taken place. They've had 11,500 responses to that consultation, of which the NUJ's was just one. But we worked alongside sister unions in putting together submissions to that, and a whole host of publishers submitted to that as well, and a whole range of other organisations, because that is a really crucial part of how this is going to develop. So we do a lot of work with our parliamentary group, raising these issues in Parliament through debates. I've been working today on an early day motion that's going down, highlighting our concerns about this. And as I said, we work with our sister unions and also through the IFJ, the International Federation of Journalists, which has a good statement in relation to the development of and use of AI.
What reaction are you getting when you go and talk to these bodies? Are they sympathetic? Are they worried?
To which bodies and to
the employers
Parliament
that you go and
employers?
Talk to,
yeah. Well, I think there's a desire, isn't there, sometimes to do these things at pace and to kind of keep up with the technology and keep up with what other people are doing, and that can have its own inherent pitfalls. So we have seen things where employers have kind of tried things and they've gone wrong. I think that's why it's essential that where tools are being rolled out or things are being tried, they're absolutely done alongside having discussions with the journalists and agreements with the journalists about how that happens. So I would say, there is, it's a mixed picture, and some employers have pressed ahead with it more quickly than others. But I think it's a big issue and it's growing. We did a survey of members last year to ask people, for their thoughts and concerns around this issue. And at that point, there were quite a lot of respondents who said actually it wasn't being used in their workplace. Some said that it was. I suspect if we did that again now, not very many months later, that would have changed quite radically.
What are you basically asking these people? What is the question you're asking them, and what do you want them to reply to you?
Well, to have a kind of proper framework agreements, to have these discussions with their journalists, and to be transparent about the use of AI, both to the journalists but also to readers, to those who are ingesting the content that's produced, because that's fundamentally important in terms of the relationship between the employer and members of the public. And if there isn't that transparency, which, to some there's some efforts towards that, but it's not as robust as it should be. So we've been pressing, for example, to have proper labelling and transparent labelling on content that's produced. But actually, in some websites, there's simply a kind of catch-all statement at the bottom, which people probably haven't even seen, which talks about the potential use of AI, rather than it being clearly labelled on stories where it's been used.
It's a huge subject. It's like a great tidal wave, isn't it? And you're trying to at least control it, because we're never going to push it back.
It's very big, isn't it? And I think that's one of the issues for everybody. But it's everywhere as well. If you look at your phone or you search, you get now the AI summaries at the top of search engines. I think, and things are always evolving on the technology that you're using. Things pop up that you haven't seen before, and suddenly there's a new tool. So it is ever changing, and I think it can feel quite difficult to grapple with because of that. But that's why it's even more important, I think, that we really try and put these frameworks in place so there's the basis for having these discussions.
I've eventually got to like Alexa in the corner. She can be very useful, but also a bit scary. I'd like to introduce you now to Professor Charlie Beckett, who joined me earlier from the Journalism AI Project Department of Media and Communications at the London School of Economics. He talks of the plus factors and the drawbacks of artificial intelligence.
What I would say is that, I worked for 20 years as a journalist, right through the move to digital tools and online. I spent the last 20 years at the LSE examining how technologies are changing journalism. And the reason I started looking at it in 2018 was that I could see that in other fields as well, that AI was starting to have a serious fundamental effect. And indeed, we've seen in journalism, it does have that important effect. I wouldn't say it's going to transform everything overnight. There's a lot more friction involved in actually putting it into practice, because journalism is a weird and wonderful profession, isn't it? Where you are up against deadlines, you're having to improvise, you're having to be creative at times, and often that's a human skill rather than the machines. But yes, certainly AI is a boon. We can talk about all the risks as well. Many of the risks are the kind of risks that you get in AI, using AI in anything, that it's not as clever as it thinks it is, it makes mistakes, and of course it's a technology that's produced by big tech companies who want to make lots of money and are, in a sense, overhyping its potential.
How can a machine be emotional, Charlie, and put into any sort of report or a feature? The colour, the smells, the sounds, the things that journalists absorb whenever they're writing a story.
Yeah, well, it can't. It can appear to. I mean, one of the uncanny things about this generation of AI tools is that they often appear to have human characteristics. They can imitate the way that we think, but no, they don't have the emotional resonance. Now, of course, a lot of journalism is not emotional. A lot of journalism is not particularly creative. It's very routine work when you think of the research you might have to do or the way that you distribute your journalism. A lot of that can be automated. But I think in a world where there is much more AI in journalism and in every other field, the bit that's going to stand out is the human bit. And that will be things like curiosity. AI is not curious about the world. It doesn't care about the world. It doesn't have compassion. It doesn't have empathy. It doesn't have a sense of humor. So those values, I think, are going to become even more important. And I don't think we actually stress them enough at the moment. We tend to rely too much on digital tools. We rely too much on routine, formulaic content. So this is a kind of wake-up call. Get back to the real things, reporting, getting out of the office, being more expert, and caring more about why you're doing your journalism.
To actually use it as a tool, are you suggesting, rather than a way to personal expression?
Absolutely. I mean, it can help you to be more original and thoughtful. A lot of the journalists I speak to who use AI tools often use them as kind of brainstorming thing. They'll say, "Look, I've got to do this story again. I do it every 3 months. Can you think of some better ways, better perspectives, better sources, perhaps better people to interview to freshen up this story?" So you can use it like that as well.
What about whenever you're talking to students or to your colleagues, how do you balance the pros and cons of AI? Because there definitely are advantages and disadvantages, as you've said.
And it really does depend on what kind of journalist you are. what kind of journalism you're creating. So, for example, if you're working in financial journalism, it's brilliantly useful because financial journalism is so much about data, and AI loves handling data. But if you're, a foreign correspondent reporting from the field, then perhaps it's less useful. Some of the use cases, as I said, are very mundane, but can be transformational. Just take translation or transcription. For some journalists, that's going to be a really important part of their work. But for others, it may be just too risky. I'm doing breaking news. I can't rely on the AI as a kind of fact checker or truth machine. I've got to do it myself. So I would say to anybody doing any kind of journalism, or perhaps a student, check it out, because there may be a tool that you hadn't thought of that will help you to do your journalism. Um, and it's really important that you optimize your capacity, that you do the best journalism you can. So I would say to everybody, even if you're very skeptical about it, even if you're very worried about it, uh, try out different tools, talk to other people to see what works and what doesn't work. There's no sort of set rules. There's no there's no easy way to judge it. You have to do it for yourself.
You've talked about factual reporting and journalism. What about feature writing, which depends very much on the person, their approach to life, their approach to the person that they're writing about?
Well, I think one of the useful aspects of this is if you are doing something more extensive, whether it's a long feature or a film, AIs can be really helpful just simply organizing yourself. If you're handling large volumes of data or content, AI can be a really helpful way to, organize that. Video editing, for example, if you need to add subtitles, something as simple and banal as that, AI can do that automatically for you. Um, but yes, at the heart of it is going to be your vision, your feeling about the story, your sense of what is important, and those are human values.
Just finally, Charlie, is it going to make all of us in journalism and all aspects of journalism lazy and hamper the skills of research?
Yeah, I think this is the same with any new technology. People say, "Oh my goodness." I mean, the same happened when, in the invention of printing, people said, "Oh my goodness, we're going to get lazy. We're not writing our books out in long form," kind of thing. And when we got when we had digital tools, people said, "Oh, well, digital photography will make you lazy because you won't have to worry about selecting your shots so much." And there is some truth in this, I think, that there is a danger, for example, that as journalists, we won't bother ringing people, we just send an email. And we all know that having a conversation with somebody is a much better way to get their views or their feelings about something. So yes, there's a danger that absolutely that even in your own daily life, perhaps when you reply to an email, you perhaps go to the AI generated automatic reply. Sometimes that can be very helpful, save you some time, but it can mean that you're going to create very banal, boring, predictable content that you're not thinking for yourself. You're not being creative. So I think, yes, that's definitely a danger. But it's the same danger whenever we have something that makes life more convenient and efficient. And as I said before, the people who make the extra effort will stand out from all the other people who are too lazy and just rely on the AI.
Thank you very much, Charlie Beckett.
Thank you, Anne.
So there is hope. He's wonderful, wasn't he? Jude, somebody is pinching our work, our voices, our writing, whatever, our photographs, Kevin. What redress do we have in law?
That's to be seen. I think it's before I get into the answer, I just want to thank everybody for remembering Lyra. I knew her more from protests and picket lines than from journalism. And it's just wonderful that everybody is keeping her in their thoughts. So thank you so much.
And we welcome her sister here. There you are, Nicola. Thank you for coming. We'll have a chat in a minute.
So legal redress, I think we have to be modest, not to give an entirely lawyer's answer, but we have to be modest about what AI actually is. I have explained AI, generative AI, to a number of lawyers as the worst paralegal who has ever worked for you. And people didn't really grasp what I meant. And that's because whenever you use generative AI, you have to be hugely specific. And AI is actually just a tool, and it's all about the prompter. So if you get a bad result, it's because you're not using the tools properly. I think whenever we get a really bad AI outcome, sometimes that's the person who put in the prompts.
Who are these people?
Well, anybody. I think AI results in... I think we have to be really clear that AI is about probability. So that means that whenever I type in Anne Hales, it will come up with all of the things that people search with Anne Hales, all of the scandals.
And I have no control over it, and that's the problem.
No. But there's also a bit of a bias in that, and there's lots and lots of legal issues. But really, it's a bit like the Morecambe and Wise sketch in that they're playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order. They're creating a new piece of work, but it's actually little tiny sections of existing work that has been scraped off the internet. And it doesn't value one source higher than another, and it will just push out whatever it wants. In terms of redress, there are a number of cases going through the court at the moment, which I could go into in detail, but there are better ways to cure your insomnia. Probably one of the most interesting is around Getty Images and Stability AI. And Getty Images, they knew that their images were being swept up into this search engine and just being thrown in. And they were all copyrighted images by really amazing photographers. But in that case, we're not at an outcome stage yet, but there's loads of difficulties in that we have to trace the original image all the way through the machine. It's a little bit like, well, I'm vegetarian, but I imagine how mince is made. You're trying to find the cow that went into your beef burger, and that's really,
and you have to find the farmer who brought that cow up.
Yes.
So can you get to those people?
Well, yes. I mean, I think there's lots of really interesting opportunities through the EU AI Act, which may or may not apply to Northern Ireland because we may or may not be in Europe, or who knows. It's too late on Friday to start that talk. But it's really, really interesting because the fines in that case are a little bit like the GDPR fines in that they're linked to the turnover of the company. So the more successful the company, the larger the fine will be. So there will be an incentive for companies to act responsibly and ethically.
Could a worker who's put out of work because of AI, I'm thinking of this UK thing where apparently we're all going to be out of work, could those people go to you as a lawyer and say, I've been wrongly dismissed by a machine?
I think there would be arguments over whether or not those are genuine redundancy situations, and that would get very, very technical. I think, I was reading Nell McCaffrey's piece on fashion she only ever did one piece on fashion, and it's about 3 sentences long, about how it was on men's fashion and how men should wear clothes, and she agreed with that. It's very, very funny. Well, but it's a really, really wonderful piece. But, I mean, no generative AI could create that piece. I think there is a risk, and I sort of compare journalism with the legal industry and also with marketing. So we have a highly regulated legal services industry in Northern Ireland. I sit on one of the committees of the Law Society, and the work that we do is regulated, and if my piece of work is my work, and if that's wrong, my insurers have to pay out on that. So there's a very, very clear, these are the limits of what you can use AI on, and you can't, I can't put, for example, privileged information into AI where it actually effectively becomes public. And I think for journalists, we also need to think about the journalistic privilege aspect. But at the other end of the spectrum, we have marketing and PR, and AI is very good at creating a very quick press release. And that has resulted in a lot of redundancies and a lot of closures of really significant, long-standing marketing companies. So I think where I end up landing is that journalists need to realise that this is a tool for certain tasks, and it's a new skill, and the more they know about it, the more skilled they are at using it where it's appropriate.
Stefan, I hope you haven't been put off your chosen profession by all of this. Tell me a little about your training at the Met College in the Springfield Road. Is AI a big subject?
Not necessarily, no, I haven't really touched base on it, but I feel like we should at some point, because a lot of our core modules would be based around tech, whether it's filming or writing on a computer and so on. But at the minute, we've just been kind of doing TV shows and radio programs. But going forward, I think there's a load of new stuff on loads of magazines, a lot of written work. But I feel like it does need to be touched base on about whether you can use it or not, because it hasn't been mentioned once.
You're the editor of the college magazine.
Yep.
And I mean, you've written a lot of articles. You're very interested in the whole thing of journalism. The first thing, when I met you some time ago, very short time ago, the first thing you showed me was your NUJ card. And that was rare to me. There couldn't be too many of your colleagues in the union yet. But it's important, isn't it, to be part of a body like this?
Most certainly. I mean, they always offer just some sort of protection. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here what I'm doing right now if I didn't sign up. When I became a student, we were encouraged to join the union, but yet again, only certain people who can be annoyed to will do it. But what was I going to say? Well, sorry, what was your question again? It's left my head.
Well, I was just wondering, how do you see your future panning out? And do you use AI in any way when you're planning your future?
Well, I just want to touch base because remember there you said about the magazine. Because I'm the editor of the magazine, I can tend to typically tell if someone's been using it or not. I don't know if it's just. I see it's kind of like a demographic thing. I feel like most people my age growing up have used it so much. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I use it all through school because it's easier. But when it comes to journalism, you can't use it. I feel like you need that compassion and the ethical values to do a good article. I feel like human connection and having a personal opinion on something is very important. So when we were doing the magazine and stuff, if someone had written a piece and I'm going, it's a wee bit weird. Because we're all sandwich, sure, you would have wanted them here, to be honest, like, that use it like, for certain parts, yeah. Mm-hmm. But going forward, for future terms, I feel it is an issue that needs to be addressed to us at some point, because it can get out of hand, as Ing says. It's more of a tool, it's not a replacement. It's too easy just to put in the AI generative, write me a 500-word article on this topic. Because if you're not going out and you're not learning, you're not doing the things you should be doing, you're not getting the skills you need for the workplace, you're less desirable then for employers.
But I think I know you've got pride in your work. You study I mean, I'm a newspaper person. And it was funny when I was up at the college talking to some of your colleagues, they actually didn't think in terms of newspapers, I find. You know, they didn't carry a notebook or a pen, they didn't write articles, they didn't explore the whole thing. Are newspapers important to you?
I would read them online, or I would buy them. Mm-hmm. But in terms of if I was going out to do a story, very rarely I would bring a pen and notebook. It would all be on my phone, because I could take voice memos, I can write quicker than writing down, and I could write, not in shorthand, but I can summarise it better when I'm typing, and so on, if you know what I mean.
And you can take photographs with your phone.
Take photographs, yeah.
I mean, this is AI in action, isn't it, Kieran?
Exactly, yeah. And any photo you take without ever having edited yourself manually, it's already being touched up and tweaked and finessed in different ways by iPhone technology. Talk to any lecturer now and they will tell you of the alarm, I think, in academia around their students using generative AI to either submit assignments, but also in positive ways. One lecturer friend of mine was telling me that it's quite common now in their class for, whilst they're speaking, their lecture is being transcribed in real time, summaries are being generated of their 2-hour lecture into 10 bullet points, and now the student has their bite-sized takeaway. And that's good, bad, up to you to decide, but that's one way in which it's being used. And I think any young person is using it in very creative ways as well. And then kind of just touching upon, I suppose, sources of news and newspapers and all that. I mean, break down different demographics in society. 18 to 34-year-old is kind of what's classed as the young, and I'll put myself in there for another few months at least. Where this demographic are getting their news, it's not in the tactile newspaper anymore, it's on their phone. It's people who we now start to call news influencers, which is a horrible term, but people who explain the news on their TikTok account. They're not a journalist, they're not professing to be a news organization, but they are interpreting the news and putting it out there. And actually, I was quite, quite heartened during the Irish general election in November that a lot of our work revolves around tracking mis and disinformation on TikTok, in this case, around kind of election disinformation narratives. But I was actually quite surprised at the number of young people who were taking the time to explain PRS-TV, the system of voting down south, to their followers, and explaining what you do need to register to vote, what different parties stand for, all these different ways in which they are engaging with the news, engaging with democracy. And I suppose I've totally gone off AI here at this point, but I suppose I'm just making a point of how what we classify as the news and as journalists or news creators is changing so rapidly.
And in your experience, are they accurate in their reporting?
Yes and no. I think that a lot of what you might call those news influencers might be journalism students, or might be political science students, or people who have that inherent interest. But we also have a lot of what you might call self-styled citizen journalists who are going around to, down south anyways, going around to lots of protests outside asylum seeker accommodation, acting as journalists. They have their own form of news values, and they are completely off the mark on types of false and lurid claims that they are putting out, but they are presenting themselves as the real news. And we call them alternative media. They themselves call themselves truth tellers, but they are also engaging in the news, and they are using social media, they're using artificial intelligence to create content, to promote content, and to put it out at scale across social media platforms. And that's also part, I think, of the conversation for how does news and journalism try and factor and challenge that in going into the future as well.
Stefan, do you find your colleagues are going out and reporting through TikTok?
We're actually being encouraged to, for experience, to go out and kind of on-site reporting type thing. We're being trained up to do stuff like that and promote ourselves as journalists and find our niche and promote what we want to do online as opposed to writing. Because I feel like you can get the wider group of audience online than through a newsletter or a blog online.
It's a changing world. Kieran, one thing fascinates me, maybe you could answer this. Only I think yesterday it was reported that AI could determine the death date for somebody or their heart attack date. If that is so, can they also predict the winner of the Grand National?
The bookmakers are always better at that, I think, than artificial intelligence, and that's their own long storied intelligence and inform for horses and the rest of it. But you touched upon something there about predictability of when someone may die. That itself will be based on lots and lots of very personal, private, biometric data, for example. And that gets into a larger point, I think, about artificial intelligence, is that for anyone who's using these tools, we have to be very, very careful about the information that we are putting into these systems themselves, because then that then belongs to OpenAI, who run ChatGPT, or other companies too. And I kind of recoiled in horror when a friend of mine who works for a pharmaceutical company was telling me how he was using ChatGPT to generate reports for his job, and I was like, oh, Jesus, what are you doing? Because who's to say what kind of standards are being placed for the kinds of data that are being ingested by people who are using these tools, not because they've been recommended by their employer, but because they see it as a shortcut, or they see it as a way to streamline their own efficiency and the kinds of data that they might be handling. And maybe this comes back to civil servants' point I was speaking about a little bit earlier on, that for those kinds of very personal or personalized recommendations and outputs, they all rely on, as I said, private, personal data, and we have to be enormously careful on the kinds of things, and that itself is a part of the kind of AI digital literacy that we should be recommending, not just in newsrooms, but also in places of work, also in schools and universities, because people must be aware that what you put in is no longer your own. It then becomes part of the training data that's used to create the new iteration of ChatGPT. And that doesn't even get into the environmental concerns as well around generating an output on ChatGPT. I think it's something like 10 times as much energy is used as more than a Google search to create a ChatGPT output as well. So yeah, I think I've gone over a couple of topics there.
Laura, standards are obviously very important. Do you, as the leader of our union, are you concerned with standards of journalism and how they are being maybe manipulated a little bit by this subject?
I mean, obviously there is the ethical frameworks that are hugely important in the way that people are operating. The NUJ obviously has our code of conduct, which members sign up to. And I think it's been really interesting listening to what people have said in responding to your questions this evening, because I think people are highlighting all the kind of crucial aspects of this technology, both in terms of it being a tool which can be helpful, can be assistive, can make things more accessible for people, is being used in some cases to make journalists' lives easier, but then all the things that go along with that, which are the risks around it, or where care needs to be taken, and particularly, I think the words that were used in the video contribution about caring and it being a human thing that journalists are engaged in. And it was very heartening to listen to you, Stefan, talking about how you think about it, I think, and the importance of that. You're doing things as a human being, and we're using our brains, and we have to value that, I think, because if we don't collectively value those things and support and campaign and fight for journalism to be properly funded and invested in and operate in that ethical, trusted framework, then there is a risk that we could lose those things, and I think we'd all be the poorer for that. It'd be a very boring world, I think, if it was all AI speaking to AI or ingesting itself, which is where you would get to in the long run without that original content.
You almost get the feeling that is going to happen, don't you?
No, I'm an optimist, and I think that there's a lot that we are doing and can do and as members of the NUJ working together, but working together, more broadly with members of the public who care about this issue as well, that we can put these safeguards in place and make sure there is a proper framework that we're all working in.
Jude, it's so interesting, isn't it, to hear all of this and to wonder just where we're going and what is going to happen in the future and what, as I say, what redress we have.
Yes, I think it's all about how it's going to be used in the future and the responsibilities and how we behave as professionals and how journalism professionals behave. I would be. There are darker parts of AI where there is generated harm. This morning I saw a fairly clunky video of Arlene Foster working in a chip shop set to music, but that would have taken a few minutes to create, and it's really, really concerning. And I know a lot of female journalists who have experienced the most horrendous types of abuse online. I think there's a very significant issue in terms of online harassment, and deep fakes can be created at, within 10 seconds. And I think that's particularly concerning for journalists and female journalists in particular in this jurisdiction. The abuse that women and minority journalists get is just astonishing. And I don't really think I've had several sort of pylons instigated by certain homophobic commentators, and the police just don't really want to do anything.
Do they know what to do?
No. I had to explain to them how Twitter worked, which was an interesting conversation in Musgrave Street. So I would definitely be a fan of joining a union, because you do really need that backup and the legal support and the emotional support, and also the solidarity and camaraderie, and even just a sounding post. I think I've probably gone off the question that you asked. I can't even remember.
No, you're very interesting. I could listen to you forever.
I think one thing, and it's a little, AI can be used as a risk mitigation tool, and it can be used to double check things. And one of the things that has caught my eyes, Women's Aid created a sort of relaunched reporting guidance for domestic abuse and domestic violence. And this morning I saw a really badly written headline from a major publication in this jurisdiction about a man groped two women. And I think there's a technical term for groping, and I don't think it's groping. And I've seen a number of other really poorly written headlines. And again, going back to my point about the prompting and using AI as a tool, if I were writing a headline, now this is a very over-egged pudding, but I would say put this article into generative AI, create a headline using these guidelines, and then copy and paste in the guidelines, and it would give a headline that is consistent with the guidelines. So there are ways that AI can be used to help. Now, I'm fairly sure that a half-decent journalist would be able to write a headline faster than an AI machine, but I think that is how it would work and how that could be a risk mitigation tool. I think, just following on from some of the points you made about knowing that a piece has been written by AI, there are a number of real giveaways, and it's really, really funny because you will have either poor spelling, and by poor I mean American, sorry to any Americans. Well, you've got your own problems. I don't think me slagging you off will be the worst thing that'll happen today. But also the dashes. I've noticed that the dashes, they're not dashes that people who type in this country use. So there are always sort of telltale signs that you can see. And I've spoken to a few employment lawyers, and they have, tested the procedure, and employment law is very, very different in certain niche respects between Northern Ireland and England and Wales. But again, going back to the number of times that it's all about percentages and number of occurrences. So employment lawyers I know have tested AI. Please create a discrimination, give a view on this discrimination case in Northern Ireland using Northern Irish law before a Northern Ireland employment tribunal. And Northern Ireland is littered throughout it, and it refers to the Equality Act 2010, which does not apply in Northern Ireland. So those things, you just have to be very, very careful about how you use it. And I think it is a skill, and I think, journalists, because of their natural curiosity and their natural, the benefit of their training will mean that they're always going to be better than machine, I think. They are going to know that certain types of crimes and where there are live court proceedings cannot be reported. But an AI machine won't be able to pick that up because it will be trained on the data of a sexual offence that has already been reported 5 years ago. So that's the skill of a journalist, and I don't think AI can ever replace that. I mean, it might sort of bite at its heels a little bit.
Well, we'll have to be very careful. Let me bring in Nicola at this point. You're very welcome. Thank you for being here. You were talking to me about Lyra and her fascination with technology. She was a good journalist, and she was thorough. And just sum up, I mean, you're her loving sister. Tell me a little bit more about, just her whole attitude towards technology, as opposed to being there as she was that night to report with her heart.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the NUJ as well on behalf of our family for continuing to remember Lyra and keeping her in your thoughts and continuing to champion justice for Lyra as well for us. So I'm really, really grateful to you all and for inviting me to join you all here tonight. Lyra was absolutely fascinated by all of the new technologies. She had every single gadget under the sun. Made my older brothers jealous because she was single and could afford them. Every time a new gadget came out, she had to get it. And she wanted to apply it, obviously, to the work as a journalist. At one point, she actually went off and did some startup with technology. So she then took her learning from that and applied it to her work in journalism. And part of her journey actually landed her in different newsrooms in the UK, training other journalists on the use of digital media in their work, in their newsrooms. The Guardian, different places like that. And so I think she would have been very interested in this new technology. Obviously, she hasn't been here during the explosion of AI, but I think that she would have been very interested in it for all the reasons everyone has said here tonight, for how it impacts on the creativity, how it could be a problem for some people, but how it could also be used as a tool, because I think she would be interested in that as well. I think she'd be fascinated with it. And she could get easily distracted. Catherine, you know her very well. And she would probably be distracted with it. It would be the new shiny thing to take her attention.
But I imagine she would have studied it. I mean, she wouldn't have just accepted it. She would have studied it and determined whether it was good for her.
I think so. I think she would have also, I mean, I can't put words in her mouth or anything, but I think that she would have wanted to know everything there is to know about it so that she could learn of the usefulness of it and the dangers of it. And I think she would be the kind of person to be like this young gentleman, Stefan here, do you know, to, yes, it's there, yes, these things can be useful, but there's nothing better than the human touch with regard to telling people's stories, bringing the stories together. And I think, I mean, anyone who knew her, she, it was the human touch that she had that allowed people to open up to her, people that didn't open up to any other journalist in the field because of her empathetic nature. And that can't be replaced by a computer, no matter how well you create that machine. Do you know, it can't feel, it can't bring across the emotion in the same way that a living, breathing, human, heart-beating person can do.
And that's why Lyra is remembered so fondly, because she was somebody who went into it in depth, but on her own, you know, really just tugging away at all the ends and bringing them all together into a good, accurate story.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, she just always, she followed the evidence, do you know, and that's what she always wanted to do. So even if someone had told her something and gave her kind of a lead, she would go, that would be okay. She would put it on the shelf, but she would follow the evidence to see if that could be corroborated with other evidence from other sources, other people, and then make her mind up. She wouldn't have been the kind of person to just jump to conclusions, let's get this out there, flash in the pan story. It wasn't like that, you know, she put her heart and her soul into it. I mean, I remember when she travelled around America talking to the boxers for the piece that she did for Mosaic Science. And I mean, she was still talking to those people in the weeks before she was murdered, because she created such a strong connection with them. But she went out and met them. She stayed in one of their houses and everything and learned everything there was to know about them. And when people in America were ignoring the illnesses that boxers were facing due to brain injury, from their profession, she gave them a voice, you know, and she really, really cared about them. And, you know, when she would come back from doing her stories from wherever, you know, she talked about the people, you know, like, even on the day she was murdered, I spoke to her a number of times on the phone, and she had a story to come out about the Reverend Robert Bradford and Ken Campbell. And she said to me, do you think Reverend Campbell, Bradford, do you think Reverend Bradford would be happy about what I've done? And I said, well, do you know, I think he'd be happy that he was never forgotten about and that you cared enough to try and tell his story. Do you know, but even on the day she was killed, she was concerned about the feelings of the people she was writing about. And I mean, that gentleman was killed before I was born, do you know, and she still felt a strong, close connection to that person and wanted to do good by them. And the people she wrote about, no matter who they were from the very, very beginning, they like became part of her. I don't know whether other journalists have that experience where their subjects almost, they care about them and they become part of their life in one way or another. And some you probably stay in touch with, some you'd probably, you know, want to run the other way if you saw them, I'm sure. But I think it's all about the human connection, and that's what she was all about. She was always like that she was able to speak, and she was always very curious and wanting to know how every single thing worked, you know, interested in it all. And fascinated. It would have been interesting to know what she made of this artificial intelligence explosion.
Well, I hope you know that we're sort of watching and waiting and willing to help. We have some flowers at the front here, and we'd like you to take them, as you did last time for Lyra's grave.
Thank you. It's her birthday on Monday.
Stefan, you've heard a lot today that must have been interesting to you, maybe surprised you a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I always like try comedies here to make new connections and just listen. That's what basically what I'm doing, just sitting back and observing. Very stoic, just listening. But there's a lot to take away from, and going forward, it would definitely make you behave differently when it comes to using AI in your work.
It's been fascinating. And Seamus, I mean, you're in the south of Ireland, looking at the same problems, I suppose, as we are here. What is the scene as you see it?
Well, I think what's important is that AI does not recognise borders, and therefore, so the scene that's described, and Kieran works very closely, obviously, in the south. The scene is exactly the same. The only difference, and the interesting difference, and we have it as particularly within the NUJ, is that we have one foot in and one foot out. We're, the NUJ in Ireland is part of the European community. UK is not part of the European community, and the logistic. I mean, it's the horror of Brexit writ small. And today, for instance, when we were faced with going off about leaving AI for a second, but to underline the difference, that when the General Secretary and myself were writing to our respective ambassadors in relation to what happened in Turkey, I was also able to write to the EU Commissioner for media. Now, Turkey are not members of the EU, but they are aspirant members. So you have this bizarre thing where you're writing about Turkey, who's not in the EU, but the media commissioner may have an influence to air it because we need to watch their human rights record, but the UK don't have that protection. I think, what is important, Laura mentioned the International Federation of Journalists, and I think that there is a need for an international response to AI. The notion of Ireland or Spain or someone doing it on their own, that's absurd. There's a role for UNESCO, I think, particularly. There's a role for the UN. There's a role for the EU. There's a role for the Council of Europe, because AI impinges on human rights. It impinges on education, on intellectual property. Listening to what would Lyra say? Lyra was a complete pain in the arse. That was her most endearing feature, because she challenged, she didn't take no for an answer, she asked questions. The basis of AI is that it is a compliant tool. It's a useful tool, but it doesn't, I always said that the original journalist was the little boy in the Hans Christian Andersen story who says the emperor is naked. Yes. What you would do now is you would feed into an AI machine, tell us what the emperor is wearing. And it's not the job of AI to challenge. It doesn't operate within an ethical framework. It can't. But what is important, and this is where we have reason to be optimistic, is that the people who are feeding in the information have the opportunity to shape the future by imposing an ethical framework on technology. And that's what we are also trying to do in the South. I would have to say that, companies in the Republic have moved more slowly than in the UK. That's not to say that it's not happening, but I think there is caution. The Irish Times experience was a salutary lesson. We also had another interesting experience with Malcolm Denmark's group, Iconic, where they carried a headline about which actually asked the question whether we had, I don't know, do you remember the precise ones, do we have too many asylum seekers in Ireland, was the question. and it's a little complicated, but it illustrates what happens here. It appears on the iconic newspaper, so they're the largest regional newspaper group in Ireland at the moment, owned by Malcolm Denmark, and I'm in polite company, so I won't describe him as I would like to. But he doesn't recognise unions, and that's relevant. The headline appears under a byline, AI generated, so that they do label it. It generates this, it's a relatively balanced piece. It does kind of Erlava Warnogs, Erlava Wella on the one hand and on the other, but it contains incredibly vicious stuff which feeds into the narrative. It doesn't explain who asylum seekers are. It doesn't explain how you apply to international protection. It doesn't explain, uses the words like, Paul, a bogus asylum seeker. You can't be a bogus asylum seeker. You either are or you are not. You have an entitlement to apply international protection. So that appears on the website of all of the newspapers within the group. The Tullamore Tribune, the Midland Tribune, the Limerick Leader, the Tipperary Star. His ownership is a failure of Irish policy in relation to concentration of ownership. But it appears on each individual site. So loads of people get the Tullamore Tribune, where I used to work, and they ring the editor. But he doesn't know about it, because it was generated censorally. But legally, he's the editor, and he is responsible for that. So the incitement to hatred on the Tullamore Tribune lands at his desk. Equally, Limerick, various people contacted. No one can explain who actually did this. So the NUJ issue a statement, and we condemn it, and we call for it to be withdrawn. And it was going to be withdrawn, but because we called for it to be withdrawn, Malcolm Denmark apparently had a hissy fit and said, well, we can't do that now because they will be saying that the NUJ told us to do it, and we took it down because of the NUJ. So then what they did was they concocted a story to say, no, this wasn't a story at all. This was an experiment to see what would happen if you asked AI this question. But the point is, they could have asked them any kind of questions. They could have asked them what colour Smarties they liked. They could have asked them, what they thought of horse racing. But instead, they choose that clickbait question designed to inflame. But what is encouraging is that in some respects, the reaction to that and the lesson from that and the ethical response of journalists as well was that it caused a debate that we might not otherwise have had. So that's a long answer. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. We've journalists in the room, and probably they'd agree with me. Sometimes you write an article and, the editor or somebody might put up a headline that is entirely unsympathetic to what you've written about. I mean, it's the same sort of thing. It's getting misguided between here and there.
Hold on, you're on very dangerous territory.
Right.
I was a sub-editor. That's my profession.
I'm sure you read the articles.
Sub-editor is a word once described as gentlemen who destroy other men's words and then go home in the dark. And they were always men, and they did go home in the dark. The difference is that the sub-editor was in the room and was accountable. There was a chief sub-editor and there was a quality control. But you also knew who the chief sub was. The problem writers now have is they don't necessarily know who edited and who changed the copy or what values informed the change.
Let's throw it open to the floor now. Catherine is always first. She's a news hound personified.
I'm first on this occasion on because I am so proud that Suzanne Breen of the Belfast Telegraph proposed Lyra for membership of the NUJ of my branch, the Belfast District, and I seconded her. And I am very, very glad to say that I have such happy memories of what Lyra's work consisted of. And Nicola hit the nail on the head when she said Lyra would have been after any wee toy that she heard about, because she would. I remember she was, and the fact that she was born in about 1990 didn't take away from her enthusiasm for uncovering the past. I remember one of the first times I was talking to her was about a wee fella who was shot dead by the IRA at Belfast Zoo. And she was determined, that was in the early 70s, and she was determined she was going to find his body. So she got a photographer to fly a couple of drones up over the Black Mountain to see if there was any evidence at all of Earth moving there. And I mean, I thought that was amazing. And the answer is yes, Lyra would have used AI, but what Charlie Beckett said about the heart, the humanity and the compassion of journalists, that's what's missing from AI. And when we talk about AI, we talk about how AI is being trained. And that's the problem. It's a tool that repeats. And that wasn't like Lyra. And the reason I wanted to speak, I'm very conscious that Lyra isn't here, but I would love to read from, very briefly, from one of the last pieces that she wrote before she was murdered. And I think this shows the heart and the empathy and the wisdom that she had. And it's a piece called The Suicide of the Ceasefire Babies. And she was writing about the peace process and how she looked back on it. And I'm sure a lot of you will remember it. And I'm going to summarise it very, very quickly, because I'm sure an awful lot of other people want to speak. But basically, what she says at the end is, the story of how my generation got fucked over was a different one. We didn't sign up to a war and get sold out by a surrender. Politicians, hoping to sell the peace deal to our parents, made 3 promises. The first promise they barely delivered on: peace. Loyalist paramilitaries stopped terrorising Catholic neighbourhoods. Instead, they terrorised their own. The Provisional IRA and various Republican splinter groups faded away, but in their place grew new groups with names like the New IRA. The second promise we were made was prosperity. Peace, we were assured, would bring a thriving new economy. It never appeared. It didn't matter what qualifications you had. The most plentiful work was to be found in call centres. The third promise the politicians made and broke was the one that hurt the most. It was felt mostly in the areas that had already been ravaged, the ones where the gunmen continued to roam. Your children, they told our parents, will be safe now. With the peace deal, the days of young people disappearing and dying young would be gone. Yet this turned out to be a lie too. And AI will never write a piece like that. Thank you.
Any other comments? Yes, Una. Yep, sorry, please do, Jude.
Sorry to talk over Ina, but in preparation, I was thinking a lot about Lyra, and the first time I met her, we'd spoken online a lot, and we knew that we had allied values, and we had lots of friends in common, and she'd just given a talk at City Hall. And she was really, really buzzing, and she was just all over the place, and everybody wanted to talk to her. And I said to one of our mutual friends, I've never met her. And he dragged me over, and my friend gave me my full name, which is really unusual. I only get that whenever I'm in trouble or in court, or both. Well, Jude Copeland, but I normally just get called Jude because there's not very many of us around. And the bit that AI will never replace is Lyra she was all over the place. Everybody wanted to talk to her. And as soon as she heard my name, she just stopped and she concentrated just on me. And she's like, and I will never forget her first words. And it wasn't, this struck me at the time, not after we lost her, but she just said, I have wanted to meet you for so long. And I swear I would have told that woman anything. Like, I don't know if that was true. I think it might have been, but I would have trusted that woman. And that's what a good journalist does. I would have told her all the secrets. But anyway, yeah. So, do you know what? Technology is never going to replace that. Sorry, Una.
Una.
Thanks, Jude. That's a very good point about trust. I'm not sure if this is on. Yes, it is. Yeah, trust in journalism is a very key thing. You know, we need to be able to trust the journalists who go out and sometimes to reveal the most intimate secrets of our lives. You know, we have to trust them that they're going to tell our story properly. And there's been a bit of research by the BBC and Media Cymru just out this year saying that what communities want, particularly marginalised communities, are three things: care and collaboration and consideration of their needs. So that bit of research says it all, I think, and I think anyone who shows a bit of empathy, people who get out the door to tell the stories and not get dragged down by journalism, not journalism, they're doing all the right things, because what machine is going to be able to go out and talk to you face to face and find out what the true story is about what's happened to you in your life? So honing your interview techniques, I think, is going to be very key. That first person testimony is not going to be ever done by a machine. And I just wondered, you know, what maybe the panel think about, you know, this fact that we can't replace these human attributes of being considerate and caring and wanting to collaborate with the people that we deal with.
It seems to me it's almost like a partnership, Kieran, you know, between the machinery and the person.
I think so, and I think that 100% correct. Technology will never replace that ability for empathy and be able to tell stories in powerful ways. But what I kind of touched upon earlier on when I was talking about young TikTokers TikToking about the election last November, what I do get quite excited about are the different forms of media that are now possible and the different ways in which people can cover the news, create news. I mean, since I guess it was the Serial podcast about 10 years ago, that's kind of launched the podcast boom of the last 10 years. That's a very interesting way for being able to tell intimate stories that aren't perhaps as well suited to visual or newspaper forms of media. And that's what's happening. So we are finding new ways and powerful ways to tell stories that connect with people, that perhaps connect with people where they are, if it's mobile first type stuff as well. And I think it kind of strikes at the kind of heart of, be it AI or technology at a larger level, is that balance of how do we marry the best qualities, the best characteristics of these tools, of these technologies, with our own interests as, be it researchers or journalists or whatever it might be, to tell powerful stories and to make people's voices heard and to touch upon those three aspects or characteristics that you mentioned as well, Una.
Laura, do you agree with that? Would you put that forward, that it's a partnership between technology and the person?
I mean, I think, you know, listening to what people have said and what people have said about Lyra, it is the human, isn't it, that's at the core of the journalism. And I think AI, generative AI tools can assist in certain ways. And there may be opportunities that come with that, absolutely. But you aren't going to replace the person and the individual creativity and empathy. And the words that you were using, I think, sum that up too. So, you know, those are the things that I think bring people into the profession, and they are crucial, and we have to value those. And, you know, that's what makes people human at the end of the day, and not machines.
I was hearing yesterday just that a large fashion chain are now going to take two models, twins, with their permission, and turn them into avatars, really, and that they are going to be showing the fashion in future. Now, it's not only models who are going to be out of work, it's photographers, it's the makeup people, it's the guys who make a cup of tea during a break. I mean, it's going to decimate an awful lot of jobs and areas of work.
I mean, I think that is something that our members are concerned about. You know, it came through in the survey that we did last year. And I think, you know, we have to make sure that we are trying to secure a media that supports jobs and enables people to do these really important roles that are, you know, crucial democratically, crucial for our society, the way we interact with one another, how we tell stories. You know, if we don't do that and we lose those things, we'll be losing something that's really important. So while it is a concern, we can't accept that situation. We have to fight for those jobs.
There's a lot of distortion around it. I think you were going to ask a question. Yes, about photography.
Well, it's not really a question as such. It's just something that I've been thinking about a lot recently. Being Mum's daughter, Anne's daughter, and Alan's daughter, both in journalism. They used to say that the camera never lies, which now is the biggest lie out there because it can be the most dangerous, the most disruptive, and the most scary thing. As you probably don't be putting any AI on my pictures now. But, you know, Prince Andrew is one of the examples of that. 20 years ago, he could not have denied the famous photograph as not being AI enhanced with the, can't remember the girl's name in between. But now he can say, no, that's not real, and people can believe that.
Yes, things have
So
changed
it can
very
be
much.
very, very dangerous.
Omid.
Hi, I'm Umit Osler from Brighton. I'm honored to be for the second event in loving memory of Lyra. Is a question from the curious cat. I don't have anything. I don't have any rage against machine learning, but I have concerns about a new modified type of impunity as a thicker wall that will bang our heads on, as there is no universal legislation or guidelines or code of conduct on AI that is binding for the entire world in all countries. I'm concerned about the safety and also intellectual property rights of colleagues in sadly many countries, including the work produced by our colleagues with the help of the opportunities in AI technology. If there is any breach here, we'll just, in Europe, we'll go to European Court of Human Rights and we'll use other legal mechanisms. But there are many countries where just a phone call or a very short decree by an authoritarian leader, dictator, will just override and they will enjoy the impunity. And I remember cases from many years ago, and there are still a stark reality when I helped to compile the annual case list for Pan International's Writers in Prison Committee, and also when I chaired Amnesty Journalists Network. There were many cases where colleagues simply wanted to claim their intellectual property rights, but they were prosecuted, harassed, persecuted, jailed, and they even received death threats. And I fear that if our colleagues claim any rights on this in any given countries of bad example, then I think they will be persecuted again, and with the opportunities in the hands of the oppressive regimes who are supported by media barons who are in cahoots, who buy all the mainstream media outlets. They will just enjoy their free material, and they will continue to persecute our colleagues. So I wonder if it's about time to join forces with all the colleagues around the world and also press freedom organizations to set up a kind of brainstorming group, a task force discussion group on formulating some kind of anti-impunity model to make sure that it will be binding. Maybe I'm a bit over-optimistic, but something binding, even in countries where dictatorship is rife for decades. So let's work together, I would say. Thank you.
Maybe that's going to be a subject for our next Lyra McKee event, because it's very important what you are saying. Anybody else have a question? Yes, the gentleman at the back. Oh, Corky.
No, you go first. I have a question. I would like to know the importance of new media to fight climate change, because all the time we watch TV and radio, but new media, they don't have a great influence about the climate change. It's mean all the time I watch in TV and in radio, they speak all the time about climate change, but in new media, I don't listen, I don't see at all. My question, it exists a work about specialists in new media, how we fight climate change with the new media.
Anybody like to?
By new media, are you talking social media, online platforms like that? Is that what you're... Yeah. Yeah, I mean...
Social media is
maybe it's a slightly
growing just like AI, isn't
adjacent answer, yeah, but what we have now is a scenario where social media platforms have always played piecemeal attention to regulations and their responsibilities towards the public good and all the rest of it. But now, particularly since Twitter was bought and renamed, there's now a new posture, I think, amongst social media platforms where a lot of the regulations around misinformation, disinformation, these kinds of misuses of their platforms for flooding information environments, they're starting to roll back. I think after Musk took over Twitter, I think between Facebook and X, they've sacked maybe 40,000 content moderation staff. And this is part of a wider trend that we're seeing platforms now not only pull back from the kind of tokenistic approach that they were taking, but they're actually moving in other directions. One of those directions is because they're putting more credence and more resource behind the ability for artificial intelligence to be their content moderators. And the ill effects of this are for perhaps, kind of incidents of heightened public discourse, be it the riots in Dublin in November 2023 or the aftermath of the stabbings in Southport across the UK, that we see social media platforms now being used to instigate, agitate for violence, targeting marginalised communities, but also poisoning discourse around very important topics like climate change. And AI is only a small part of the wider existential challenges or systemic challenges, perhaps, of how social media platforms are, I suppose, poisoning the well in so many different ways. So, yeah.
Thank you. Corky, we've just got time for a couple of quick questions. Corky, go ahead.
I just wanted to bring it back to a case of a story that's happening here in Ireland at the moment. It's the GAA catfishing story, in which a teacher has been involved. It's alleged that a woman teacher, catfished GAA members. I'm just thinking the role of A1 and the individual. As an individual, what power does he or she have in countering the power of AI?
Jude, there's a big question.
For this time on a Friday night, it is really terrifying in some respects. There are a lot of things that we can do. It's all about really good strategic legal advice, and the real difficulty is that you are a tiny individual versus Meta or Twitter. I was speaking to a libel, Paul Tweed, and he wrote that actually one of the hardest parts of being a libel lawyer is actually getting somebody to speak to in those companies, identifying the actual person that will address the issue. It's very, very challenging, and I think there's a thing around media literacy that we all really need to become slightly better at. And I think there's a little bit of a generational gap, and I include myself in kind of a bit of both, because I don't really like computers, because I only use mine for work. I like offline things like knitting and all sorts of geeky things like that. But it's very, very, there are a lot of ways to combat certain problems that are actually in individuals' hands. I won't go into all of them because that would constitute legal advice, but get me afterwards and I'll tell you. You can reverse image search. There are a lot of online tools that you can get to address particular issues, and a lot of what irritates me about technology as a whole and social media is that people don't really understand algorithms. So my algorithm on my Instagram is, this is being recorded, it's mainly dogs and Golden Girl clips and Cher, because that's actually genuine. Horrible admission, but those are the things that I mainly look at and that come up, and they're funny videos and they're all of those things. But my algorithm for my work phone, because I don't really search, it just has all of these default things. So I get lots of push notifications from news media that do not reflect my own views. So GB News's latest story, in the broadest sense of the word, that is promoted for my viewing because I will definitely like it. And, we've mentioned TikTok a few times. One of the interesting things I find really fascinating is people will, there is a creative element to TikTok. So people will create an engaging content, but then if you set music to TikTok or to Instagram, certain songs will be much catchier and much more popular, so they'll automatically be promoted. So I could have an awful piece of content, but if I get one of the really catchy songs, that will be promoted as brilliant content. So I think that's some of the things. I also it really annoys me when people engage with social media. So they see an article, a really, really horrible person that they vehemently disagree with, and then they share it and say, I hate this. They're actually giving money to that creator, and people don't understand that. Screenshot and share that screenshot, because then that's not monetized and that's breaking that chain. So I think we should all be a little bit more literate.
I'm nearly inclined to go on TikTok after what you've said.
See, just on the point of regulation and redress, when you look at the comparator of Northern Ireland, the state was set up in a sectarian way, and you look at issues concerning discrimination in the workplace and so forth. Now, I think that has actually been tackled somewhat in terms of the peace process, where it concerns. We created a fair employment tribunal as separate from industrial tribunals to tackle that, where the journalist is concerned. It might be an idea for the NUJ to lobby for a freestanding Act of Parliament so that you would modify employment law to have a separate tribunal which would govern AI and would hold service providers liable, vicariously liable, for infringing on core aspects of what would be broadly described as the human condition for journalists. Just an idea of eradicating redundancy.
Yeah. This gentleman here, I'm sorry, we're running out of time quite rapidly.
Okay, first of all, can I just say thanks to everybody for a really enjoyable evening. And Stefan, great stuff, my man, for such a young fella. Really, really well done. I'm going to apologise here. So in a room full of journalists and legal professionals, I'm sorry to admit I'm an accountant. And the challenges that journalism has with AI and with tech, we're seeing exactly the same in our profession. So I am a consultant on one hand, I'm a lecturer in accounting in UU on the other hand as well. So I see the beauty of AI in terms of promoting my own consultancy business, but in terms of the challenges in academia, I see huge issues there as well in accounting. But the one common thing I think we're hearing here, and it just is the point I want to make, given the fact that most people's lives are now revolving around that and around technology, the most important thing we need to do now more than ever before is be more human. And I think that's the big thing that's coming out of tonight. We need to be more human, and like I say to my students, get your arse off the seat and go and talk to people.
Excellent, thank you.
One issue we didn't touch on tonight, and I think particularly in the context of Lyra is important, is that there is a huge gender dimension to AI which needs to be addressed. On the issue of algorithms, there is a real danger that the prejudice and the stereotyping and the discrimination against women is reinforced by algorithms, and that is a real concern. But there is, outside of journalism, there is also, there's the notion, and we are in danger of sounding like, the blacksmith complaining about the introduction of the car. But there is a reality that, and above all people, Goldman Sachs have done very valuable work on this, that the greatest impact of displacement will be on low-paid women workers doing menial tasks in developing countries. And that's supposed to be a good thing. And I think in the context of Lyra and her concern, we have to remember that all of the issue, the gender dimension, is really important. One final comment. I was involved in the marriage equality campaign in the South, and we use social media and all of those platforms very effectively. But I coined a phrase which every morning, like a mantra, we were almost like a religious cult. Because what would happen is you would overnight, all of these fools would come on with 5 followers, completely homophobic, transphobic, and then all of our volunteers would come in with their smart-ass answers to put them in their place. So the mantra every morning was that it is okay to have an untweeted thought. And I think journalists have to learn that lesson.
Say it again now,
it's
slowly.
okay to have an untweeted thought.
An untweeted
Not every thought has to be tweeted. Because the problem is that you, Han, with your popularity, may have thousands of followers, and some fool decides with 10 followers that he's going to attack you. So all of your followers that decide to defend you, and they amplify that audience. And the challenge for media organisations, and we as a union have a real concern on this, is that misogyny, is a real problem online. Employers don't always live up to their responsibility. But not only that, they expect journalists now, as part of their profile, their personal brand, to have social media platforms. If you do that, you must also put in place the measures to protect them when quite bluntly, the shit hits the fan. And that's a real consequence. But I think the issue of the gender dimension of AI is something that we've been very aware of as a union. And I think in the context of tonight's lecture, it is something that we need to bear in mind.
I think we're very aware of that, Una, aren't we? And we've talked about it. Just one last question. I'm so sorry, time has gone.
I was just... Is this on? Yeah. It is on? Yeah. As content creators, which fundamentally is what journalism is about, how engaged are we always about the consumers of media? Because I think Jude pointed to a very important issue, and that is media literacy. And there's a failure by people from all generations to identify or be able to distinguish the difference between disinformation and facts, and the critical thinking that's required for that needs to be core in the curriculum from primary school right up through secondary school, through all generations, and most particularly, and to a point that my colleague in front made about the misogyny.
and how media is consumed by boys and girls, by men and women. It's becoming extremely polarised. There's a big gender gap. And I think that we are talking a lot about the creation of content, but we really have to start to think of what can be done to look at how it's being consumed. And I wonder if you had any views on that.
I think we're going to have another meeting. Very quickly, Laura, could you maybe make a comment?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important point, and it probably just segues nicely into what I would have said, Anne, if you're coming to us for closing thoughts, which is just some of the practical work that the NUJ is doing, and to draw people's attention to our Future for News recovery plan, which is on the NUJ's website, which is a whole set of kind of practical suggestions around the future of news. There is a section specifically on AI for public good, which covers many of the things that we've talked about this evening and covers the issues that Seamus was referring to just now in terms of the risks of kind of inbuilt inequality in these tools. But part of that work is also around campaigning for media literacy action, and AI literacy should be part of that, clearly. And I think maybe one other thing just to highlight is that we're about to enter into the process of the BBC Charter review process, and there's certainly a role, I think, that can be played by trusted organisations like the BBC in that work, and that would be an important role that could be played.
Thank you. Let's leave the last word up to Stefan. You've heard a lot. Your ears must be really tingling. Where do you go from here? What do you want for your future?
That's a very broad question to drop on somebody.
Paraphrase.
Paraphrase. I mean, I want to do plenty. I said to you the first time I met you that I wanted my journalism to centre around social issues because I came from a working class background and seen a lot of issues growing up and so on. So that's why it's been so important tonight to talk about AI and hone in on the fact that you need compassion, you need to keep your ethical values, have a moral compass and stick on that. So going forward, I just want to give a voice to the voiceless and focus on myself going forward. No one else.
Louis Theroux was your hero.
Louis Theroux was my man growing up. What a dude. He's a good dude.
So watch this space. I'm sorry that we've come to the end of our time because it's been absolutely fascinating. But just say tomorrow afternoon, as the Imagine Festival draws to a close, Kieran Hanna, the Vice Chairman of our committee, will be hosting a poetry, politics and pubs tour. And one of the poems he has chosen to feature is by Lyra McKee, and he's going to read it for us now, just as we finish. Oh, gosh.
Thank you. So this is one of the pubs. It's sold out, unfortunately, the pub tour, but the second pub that we're going to is actually the Reporter Bar. So we're going to do all journalist-themed poems, Seamus Heaney and Kieran Carson. And I was actually trying to... The third pub is actually McCracken's, so we're going to do like United Irishman-themed poems. And I tried to find something related to Mary-Ann McCracken. So while I was searching, I came across this excellent book called Washing Windows 2, Irish Women Write Poetry. So it's all by female poets. And so I thought that this would be ideal for the Reporter, but also for this event. So it's just a way to close. It's called Tribute to Lyra McKee by Yvonne Boyle. And just to say that the Imagine Festival is a charity, so we're operating under fair use in terms, and this is for educational purposes that we're reading this poetry, just in case this has been recorded. Tribute to Lyra McKee by Yvonne Boyle. You wrote about the intended harm and unintended suffering of those years. Your mind cleared of our post-agreement fears. Your talent, a bright star. Some do not regret their stance. Some try to steer others on another path. And others, including those younger than the voting age, still fuel dissonance and death. You were a fresh witness to that wanton rage, dark night, disturbance, fear, adrenaline. Your partner looks around and finds you on the ground, and then will never find you as you were again. And we, weary in the knowledge of the old embedded sights and sounds of violence, ask, what can writers say now? Ricochet raw, another red and precious scar, haphazard horror. You were not afraid to enter the echo chambers of loss, your spirit sucked through a terrible aperture, resonating, resounding, astounding.
Well, on behalf of Belfast and District Committee and membership, I'd like to thank the panel and all our guests, all of you. You've made it such a great night. We think of Lyra and appreciate her legacy, and we also think of her many fellow journalists, photographers, camera crews, who are going through such traumatic times in other parts of the world and here at home. So many have died in their pursuit of truth. So please remember them and their families. So many hundreds are affected even at the moment. So until next time, good night, safe home, and don't forget that the clocks go forward tomorrow night, so there'll be no lying in. Thank you again, everybody, and safe home.